Hello and welcome to another of my once-in-a-blue-moon fifth Tuesday talk shows, Millennial Rap. I'm your host and early 90s kid turned young adult by the cruel twist of fate known as time, Shaka Azule. Here we'll spend the next hour discussing and problem-solving about the modern world through as new a lens as we can manage. The millennial generation, also known as Generation Y, now spans the ages of about 25 to 40 and have seen a distressing continuation of too-big-to-fail corporate dynamics, housing conglomerates, and economic downturns that seem to not have an upside except for very few. Millennials have seen in the ballpark of 20% less pay at their current ages than their parents at their age had. This comes as gas prices lowered faster than inflation, while rent, utilities, and houses most certainly did not. All that, and we're not even the youngest kids on the block anymore, with Generation Z being inundated with technology 15 years more advanced than us at their age, and climate impacts anticipated not for their late 50s, but more like their mid-30s. At this point, it's a miracle the Zoomers are hanging in there as well as they are. So today, as we try to pull back things towards the future-sighted mindset, noting that a lot of our recent elections would have been more exciting if the under-40s had carried the vote, there's still very probably some time to begin addressing our behind-the-curve voting, healthcare, economic, and environmental goals, jobs in the face of continued automation, virtual rights, and some of the other opportunities and challenges that we can't ignore without steep, imminent consequences for our end-of-alphabet generations. Welcome to the show, Millennial Rap, hosted by Shaka Azule and engineered by Jasha May. Hey, good day, and happy top of the hour, just about. Yeah, there was an extra drum roll in there. There's no time for drum rolls. This is 2020. I think the last time we've had an orchestra gather is probably a few months back. Should be, hopefully. I've heard tubas are launchers as far as any instrument can be. Okay, well, yeah, it's nice to be back in here again. And boy, I mean, a lot has changed and not much has changed at the same time since the last time I did one of these shows. That was just about 2 months ago. We still have a bunch of issues to cover. However, it not feeling like it's in the middle of a primary season, I certainly feel a lot easier of mind, even if it's not that much more exciting. Let's put on our first guest here. This would be, I believe, Xack, are you with us?
Yeah, hey Shaka. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to have you here. As a political confidant and like-minded peer who also knows how to talk quite a bit. It was just a nice connection to have you.
Yeah, it was cool to hear you reach out. I know that we had some pretty good recent conversations online and one good long one in person, and so it's cool to hear from you and have you reach out in this way.
Yeah, well, definitely. And I definitely like to sort of stir the pot so far as just bringing in the contemporary issues to where I can, which is KMUD most of the time. During this last, season, we had some good discussions and stuff. We were both primarying. I was generally in Camp Bernie, but very amiable to Camp Yang, which you actually did some rather neat involvement with.
It ended up being kind of a fun experience for me. I was someone who was pretty politically disengaged up until this primary season. But I ended up becoming a pretty consistent volunteer and ultimately went all the way out to Iowa just to participate in the caucus. So it was all a very new and exciting experience for me and gave me kind of this firsthand look that I'd never really seen into the inner workings of a campaign before. So
campaigns themselves are a bit of a strange beast, just in the way that so much of it becomes like your message helps, but it feels like the paint job on the car, while a bunch of people vote on who should win. There's unfortunately very much I suppose one way to put it would be there's more opinions than math actually going on in the court of opinions with regards to what a campaign has or considers or is promising.
Yeah, it can definitely be interesting, and like getting out there and having so many face-to-face conversations with different people who stood in different places, like on the political spectrum, and who like supported different candidates. Like, I mean, any of the 400 Democratic candidates that there were this primary, like I feel like I met somebody who like that was their person,
Yeah.
And so it really gave me an interesting and new perspective on just where people are coming from and like what you can actually do to move a conversation forward, and then like the other times that you just have to like surrender to the fact that this person believes something different than you.
Right. Now we've got ourselves, smack in that situation going for a little while. It's actually, it's kind of like, old wounds don't feel so bad already this primary.
Yeah.
Just insofar as I'm like, well, yeah, it's okay. It's Democratic President Bush. All right. Like, we've been there before, but maybe we can push this one around a little bit. I don't know. I did see today, or just this week, Amy McGrath came in ahead of Booker in
Charles Booker.
Charles Booker in Kentucky. Yeah, and
that was a really fascinating race because I mean, since the primary ended and since Andrew Yang dropped out, it's been really interesting to see how he's kind of continued trying to push his platform. Obviously, the universal basic income being kind of the big thing, but also some of the other policies, such as like ranked choice voting or like giving people rights to their online data.
Yeah.
He's been kind of pushing those things in real ways. And one of the resources that I want to put this out there immediately because it's super cool. He started a nonprofit called Humanity Forward, and they are providing cash relief for people who need it right now. No questions asked. So if anyone's out there and they're kind of struggling because of COVID, they haven't been able to work or they've made less money, they're giving out micro grants of $250 to $500 to anybody. You can just go to their website, apply, tell them what your situation is, and they'll just give you the money, no questions asked. So that's a great resource for people to know out there.
That's enough, and you can enough to eat, enough to get some breathing room. That's really nice.
It makes a big difference for people who really are like just on that level where they're not able to like afford the next meal. That $250 means food that week. So like people should know that resource is out there. Humanity Forward is the name of the organization. So go check that out if you're listening to this and you could use that extra financial cushion because that's there. But another thing that same organization of Andrew Yang's is doing is they're helping to promote other candidates who are promoting universal basic income or the other policies that were on Yang's bracket. He's kind of following in Bernie's footsteps and how Bernie, despite not winning in 2016, Bernie set like this foundation that all these other candidates like AOC and these other down-ballot candidates followed in the trail that he blazed. And so Andrew's learning from that and saying, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take other people who believe in these ideas and get them running.
Get them something of a foothold, because we might have a Congress or a Senate that more closely represents the American, popular interest, actually, if people get elected more for their values than their connections.
Exactly. And so it's been really cool. And that race in Kentucky, of course, was like one that everyone was watching that was, of course, the person who is going to be running up against Mitch McConnell's seat in the Senate. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important race. A lot of people are paying close attention. And what was really cool about it was that it was the first race that I have ever seen in the Senate where there were 3 candidates running, and 2 of the 3 were UBI advocates.
Ooh.
And so you actually had a UBI enthusiast majority when the 3 of them were debating on stage. And it was really cool. It was a whole different dynamic, but unfortunately, the non-UBI candidate was the one that came out ahead.
She did have the war chest of $40 million behind her. As something of a pro-Trump Democrat, I believe she, I do not have her precise quotes, but that she had considered Mitch McConnell not to have backed the president as much as he could have before. And, is on the record being pro-Kavanaugh, which I'm less opinionated about. But nevertheless, it's still like, ooh, we were pretty close to actually having a Democrat in Kentucky. And not only that, but
it would have been really cool. Both those guys who are running, which is Booker and the other guy, Mike McGraw, I think his last name, both of them seemed like really cool people, and I hope they keep working in politics and trying to make a difference. Cause
definitely. And
they really embraced the U.B.I. Agenda, and they also I really like their take in general on trying to work with people all across the political spectrum.
It's hugely important to get substantial variety, because I feel like part of our whole political discourse stalemates a bit between the Democratic and the anti-Democratic, the Republican and anti-Republican kind of the two camps that are going at war without
dichotomy.
Without Andrew Yang, I saw certainly on the younger end of right-wingers actually had a little bit of a soft spot, and it was evident by the fact that Donald Trump never tweeted. He tweeted about every other candidate, but he never tweeted about Andrew Yang. And that to me looks a lot like, granted that was updated perhaps before, and he could maybe do it after Andrew's out of the race. But for the most part, it was a actually successful, actually smart businessman on the opposing team, and he has no playbook to go up against, technologically wise, younger generation, business type. That is not, the heel that Trump wants to have. Somebody who's saying, just give the money to people, as opposed to, we're going to give it to a group over here, and that group's going to oversee dispensing it onto all these other resources over there. And, one of the interesting aspects of a UBI that I found, to be something of a thought experiment is what kinds of things would crop up as ways to treat people well and give them quality of life, and sort of compete to take care of a person for about the price of a UBI. So, how nice can you make it for $1,000 a month? And then they work on the side for whatever else they need, but their room and board and, the cafeteria and amenities and things, transportation and however much can get actually covered. And it would give us something of an incentive to experiment with how well we can treat people on that kind of a budget. Now, everything can be brought a little bit dystopian if you get the, absolutely no oversight and dictators trying to run the roost with it. But even still, giving people the money, especially or particularly the democracy dollars, also came to mind as that is a brilliant enough proposal that I don't think anybody has the excuse to not implement those, which would just be $100 once a year that every American gets to put toward something, like a nonprofit or which government agency they want to fund, just sort of their piece of a democratic capitalism going on a little bit.
Yeah, give people a voice in this money-driven society that leaves so many people voiceless as it currently is.
Right. And then
I definitely agree about how easy it is to picture that dystopian version of the future. And what really drew me towards Andrew Yang's campaign was how he was painting this positive vision of the future instead.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about this $1,000 a month. It was what that represented to ordinary people. The freedom to take off a day of work or get their car repaired or to leave an abusive relationship or to not go into work if it's dangerous or if they're a high-risk person during COVID,
Right.
These are the kinds of possibilities that become possible if you have that financial floor.
Yeah.
And so that's what I really was drawn towards about the idea.
Right. At the very, least and worst you can expect from it, you're getting people who are not so needy that they need to steal and, cheat their way through or, sort of like there would be a lot less in the way of people, sitting around asking for change and needing change, because that kind of change can be, you can have enough of a quality of life that you could be you could be laid up, or you could choose to travel and see the world, and it's a little bit of a leeway to everyone. And then everybody who is currently paying their bills, and they're paying all this stuff, and they're paying employees, for them, all of their employees then have this cushion, and all of their customers have this cushion, which means they have a lot more customers. At the same point, this is basically changing around some of our tax laws that have not yet accounted for automation. So it is not like we are that Yang just says, "Oh, we'll divert a bunch of government money to this from out of the ether." It's some issues that even Bernie Sanders loved him to death, but he is definitely on the older side, and having it'd be a rough one transitioning to post-information age type economics and social abilities. There's just so many things left unaccounted for. I have before me some of Andrew Yang's policies on the environment. Today is Tuesday, which is a environmentally themed day here at the Mud often. And one of them that I like to see very much is, along with the concept of nuclear, he first puts thorium-based nuclear plants as a primary focus. And thorium is a nuclear fission, but it is a different material. It has a whole different half-life, which is a lot shorter. And it never gets quite so hot, and it can't melt down. It's got a lot going for it. But the sort of legendary lore I heard back into why we didn't use thorium in the beginning was because we were doing so much work with uranium for bombs. And thorium doesn't work for bombs. Now, that opens up a whole new possibility where there are countries that, want to use nuclear, and we don't want them having access to uranium. And then there's thorium, which is a whole answer to that, in addition to these other things. But he's got some more in here. That is, reformulate GDP to account for clean water and air, and also life expectancy. That one is kind of the biggest standing point to me, because when I think of sort of the futurism of what we're going to do as a society, doing our decision making, as more and more of it gets, I suppose, mediated by sort of cloud entities like Siri or online and digital mediums, a number like GDP that stands for national well-being really needs to be adjusted so that any kind of, say you made an AI that's trying to make the nation healthier, and it's trying to use some learning algorithms to go, well, what actually helps? If we did that with the current set of GDP, we would sell our life expectancy, freedom, well-being, healthcare. We would sell it all for GDP, and it would be a madhouse.
That's exactly right. And GDP has become this big important thing, and they talk about it on the news, and you're like, how does this actually play into my day-to-day life? And there's this disconnect there.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big things that this really kind of addresses head on with the UBI, is that there's this fundamental flaw in capitalism in general. And I speak as a business owner who's seen firsthand the great things about capitalism. I'm able to make a living selling art products because I could start a small business and compete with other people. So I'm someone who appreciates capitalism and how it can pull people up from poverty, but I also am someone who acknowledges its shortcomings. Mm-hmm. And I think the real fundamental flaw in capitalism is somebody who believes in markets, who believes in incentives on those markets, is that we're missing that baseline measurement where we're saying that a person's value is zero unless they're working.
Right.
And this is something that capitalism and socialism actually have in common, and they both say you don't get the right to meet your basic needs unless you're working, and that's where your value comes from. So this U.B.I., what it really boiled down to, and by the end of campaigning for Andrew Yang for a year, what it really boiled down to, if I had one message to put out there, it was that people have intrinsic value. And the market is never going to work properly until that is accounted for by recognizing it.
Right, and there is
a universal basic income.
Yeah, and there is something of a self-fulfilling prophecy, like ever present with people, where those who believe very hard in the market and competition, and they're like, yeah, I can make it to the top. It's extremely helpful to have that mindset for them personally, but it's also it requires as many people not believing that as there are in order for it to be so possible. If everyone thought that, we would find the limits very fast, in that there are not enough rooms for that type of entrepreneurship. And at the end of the day, on this side of hyper-automation and post-scarcity, somebody's got to drive the food around. We've got to pick it still by hand. And there's so much to do that, while, yes, it's true, you can do it all and you can make it all work, not everybody can by just the limit of, human efforts and the requirements to feed everyone. There's certainly a lot more potential to bring out, and at the same time, part of the sort of belief in people aspect that's necessary, that a UBI would kind of institute, is not only are human lives a little bit valued intrinsically, but then we allow for, say there's the autistic son to some family who, they can't compete all that hard, but they do like to help out and be a person. And all of a sudden they have enough means that they pay for some of the cost to sustain them, and then they can be nice on top of that. They can, help a few hours over here and help grandma cut her vegetables up and, do some things, but not be rigidly thrown through it like a serf through a fiefdom. It would free up our retirees to do a little bit of part-time work if they want to supplement their, SSI income, as opposed to be limited by the fact that if you make any money on SSI, it directly cuts half of that earned income out of your benefit. So we are getting close to the half-hour point where I mean to take our shtick to the calls. Do you want to stick around for a few of these calls? We might have some of those in a minute.
Sure.
The views and opinions expressed throughout the broadcast day are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, or underwriters. Time will be made available for other viewpoints. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Time right now is 7:29. You're tuned in to the KMUD Garberville, KMUE Eureka, KLAI Laytonville, live and archived on the web at kmud.org, and FM translator K258BQ Shelter Cove. Alrighty, Shaka, do you want to introduce yourself and your show a little bit real fast, and then we'll carry on through?
Yeah, I am Shaka Azule. I have on the line Xack Fischer, my friend from the next school over here in southern Humboldt. He has moved far and away and adventured through this interesting world to campaign with Andrew Yang in this last season, and do a number of other very technologically sound things, including online works, and I don't know a ton about it. But anyway, Zach's cool. And we have him on the line. And we also have callers starting to line up for the 7:30 to 7:45-ish spectrum. And I also have a bunch of notes about Ro Khanna, who's another pretty neat modern politician-y kind of character with some extra modern policies, things like using the internet in some of the roles of government, which is fantastic. But let's see about these callers. So let's put the first one up. Hello, caller?
Turn my radio off.
Hey there.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting a show that's touching on a lot of issues other than the same drumbeat that we've been hearing. I'd like to start out and preface that, I think most of everything that we're talking about, we're 3.5 months into a worldwide pandemic. There's a lack of cohesion with world governments. But assumptively, we could, without being political, we could say that we really lack true administrative strength here. And when the person that's supposed to be in charge is displaying such aberrant behavior that is not leading, I would say that contributes to a lot of the dismay of the moment. I continue and touch on what you're referring to with the U.B.I. My friends in England who grew up and have lived through generations of what they refer to as the dole. To talk about a universal basic income with there has to be education as well. The education has to be a part of that. Healthcare has to be a part of that, because a minimalist amount of a delivery of the same paradigm of a currency is kind of silly. The tax base needs to be changed so the poor aren't overtaxed and the corporations are actually taxed. Right. There's a huge conversation about more of an FDR type moment where we need a WPA, and infrastructure in the country is, of course, sorely lacking. But with this so-called administration, that would go to their in-kind constituents, and we'd see continued payouts with a lack of accountability. It's not like Donald Trump ever paid a contractor without suing them first, and still never paid his debt. So there are a lot of huge issues. When it comes down to it, I would like to express a universal basic income and voting within a two-party system, limiting voting to, under the pandemic, voting by mail with again, an administration that's threatening the postal delivery system. You talked briefly about Kentucky's vote, and yet there was only one polling place for the capital of Kentucky.
The capital, which is also and so I'm gonna finish. I want to remind people it's important to know that this is a public radio station. The person that's sitting in that little booth there, it's a hot little room. There's lots of people calling. We all have a view and opinion. Let's share them with our own compassion, but let's try to prepare our thought. Do it in a way that meets the greater good, rather than focusing on just me, what I think I want or need. Let's think about this greater good. We couldn't be focusing on a better time watching systems slow down, break down. Right. Do we need the Federal Reserve anymore? Do we need a tax base that's unjust? Do we need corporations that are leading us toward ecological destruction? What do we truly need to be human beings? It's calm down. Let's embrace each other and look at the greater good. Thank you for the conversation. Yeah, thank you for calling.
To present my views.
Yeah,
what was your name?
Thank you very much.
I'm lambasted so much. I'm going to go by my tree-sit name, Falcon.
Right on. That absolutely works, especially with all the G-men in the other room. So it's good to hear, and it's good to hear that from you. I'd love to
touch on that for one moment.
For sure.
Because he brought up a lot of really great points.
He did.
Like, one thing that he mentioned is kind of like the lack of accountability and the lack of feeling like we have good leadership in such a trying time, which I feel like a lot of people are feeling right now. And the truth is that Americans, when polled, had less faith in our institutions than ever before this pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And so you can only imagine how much worse that's gotten, and we've seen how our government's responded in a lot of ways. And I think that it's very smart to bring up that, there are good and bad implementations of all sorts of ideas, and
right.
U.B.I., I really liked the specific model of it that Andrew Yang was presenting.
Coming from Yang as opposed to from Mike Pence or.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a really good point to bring up. I mean, we've seen how, the government response to the COVID-19 has been kind of a mess.
There was a lie early on that was a well-intentioned lie, but ultimately I shudder to think how damaging it actually was, which was that masks don't help and that we don't know whether masks help. That was early on put out, not just by the president, but by some serious administrators, because we did not have stockpiles of masks and supplies for our healthcare workers. And, this was them covering up for not resupplying those, but it was also them not making the strong decision, which would be to tell the truth, but also say, look, we are putting aside a lot of these. They are going to be harder to get than toilet paper for a while. But they're very useful. Get your plexiglass screens on. Now more information's come out. My science teacher, Tom Grover, wonderful show, by the way, on I believe, second Thursday of the month in the evening, a talk show. During his last one, he covered a number of COVID kind of facts, how UV light will burn it. It is a cave bats kind of virus, so it does not last very well to UV in particular. While at the same time, antibacterial soap is a little bit laughable in some cases. Alcohol though will cut it up. But there's a UV light. There's a number of things, but one of the important ones is just not to puff humidity through the air onto other people for a prolonged period. Now, that doesn't happen when we stop and talk for a few minutes outside so often. But we've just had our bars and things shut down again, and it is the sad fact that bars and dancing and a lot of our fun stuff and indoor activities really get a claustrophobic, non-fresh air. It feels fine, but it's a terrible lack of defense.
And we've all seen, how that's impacting so many different people, especially
artists,
I look at the artists and creatives, and performances are shut down right now. There's whole sections of servers and whole parts of the economy that just aren't operating right now, and
right.
It's really shown a light on the relevancy of a lot of what Andrew Yang was talking about last year, because a lot of people, while he was running and talking about these ideas that to a lot of people seem futuristic, like universal basic income, people say Andrew Yang was ahead of his time. We didn't realize that his time was going to be 2 weeks after he dropped out when a pandemic hit, and suddenly it's hit fast forward 10 years on all this stuff that's been happening. It's
been the same overlap with Sanders and Medicare for All. Now we're at the point where Trump is starting to push the Affordable Care Act's protections on pre-existing conditions, which other countries, by the way, used to and still do call those medical histories as opposed to pre-existing conditions. Just because, they take and I would say that this is a very I prefer when possible to translate into gamer or into modern digitalized sort of information. We make our incentives be one thing or another. And when the incentive is, profit by a bunch of different organizations, as opposed to one government that's overarching bill is how expensive is it to keep everybody healthy, and then it looks for how to maximize that. It sort of applies game theory, if you will, to, all right, now we're going to have to look at how much sugar we put into kids' meals because...
it channels the power of the market towards human well-being.
Right. And in Europe, granted, they don't have big gulps. If you go have a Coca-Cola there, it tastes different. But that's in part just taxpayers not wanting to, fund 50% of the population with diabetes. Or here, the outlook is very bleak in terms of diabetes and obesity. Millennials are the most obese generation, which is a little surprising because I thought we couldn't afford to eat most of the time. But instead, we've got a continuation of these food qualities that are sort of pushing questionability into their far limits. Okay. Let's see.
Well, if I can make one last kind of note about the UBI here before, because I know we're getting close to the end of our time.
For sure.
But one last thing I kind of want to throw in while this idea is floating around is that what we're seeing right now is a lot of smaller trials. The national effort with Andrew Yang's campaign to make a national UBI pass in 2020 did not succeed, unfortunately. But we're seeing these smaller efforts now. Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, recently donated $1 billion, a large portion of which is going to go to UBI trials, and a whole slew of mayors and various government officials for small towns and cities are beginning to try these UBI trials.
Right.
And when I think of this myself, as someone who grew up in Humboldt County, and I don't live there anymore, or I would probably be boots on the ground trying to make this happen right now, but I want to plant this seed out there, is that there's a lot of parallels between how the economy is changing with automation and how legalization of marijuana is impacting small growers. It's set up in such a way that it's winner takes all. It's leaving the small guys in the dust. And we got to implement a mechanism that makes it so that everybody benefits from the legalization. We shouldn't be leaving the people who have been growing for decades just to dry up. We should be taking care of them. So if I were in Humboldt, or if I knew somebody who was in Humboldt who felt strongly about this, I would run for office. I would reach out to the people in office in Humboldt County, and I would try to implement a local UBI based on a small slice of marijuana sales.
Ooh.
And this is an idea that I'm just going to put out there for anyone listening. Talk to your friends about it. Find someone who wants to run and put that idea out there. Let's get a slice of every big corporate Coca-Cola-sized marijuana farm to put money in the pockets of the small mom-and-pop growers.
Right, because I feel like one of the things taxpayers, hurt with most is when the money just goes into the federal coffer and it disappears from their community. It disappears from not only their pocket, but their world, effectively. It goes into the federal Neverland where wars happen and where camp is sent out to, often before, without us giving them incredible heck, they go for generally the less defended, less intimidating, more ma and pa style ranchers who, might have a moderately sized grow, but who don't, have a scary sort of pseudo-armed militia to guard it. Even gangs have their representation in terms of force that generally, you're like at the heart of Humboldt. Growers really don't all have that much bite. We like to have our bark so that people don't mess with us too hard, but it's mostly to keep the foreign actual gangs out. Because, our Hills justice only works if where the majority here are moral individuals, and we've sort of had our community disintegrate a little bit around the edges, just in terms of cohesion and who knows each other across town, and sort of what the relevance is in socializing, and something like that. Might certainly it would kick up our volunteer and community efforts, just because there are a lot of people who are kind of scraping by who could be elevated potentially to the point where they start to give back and start to be, useful in their communities, or at the least not a drag in their communities.
Well, and that's the thing, and it can just create that spark, because the thing is, like, everyone's talking about tax the rich. Everyone's been talking about that for a long time, but it makes a big difference what you do with those tax dollars.
Yeah.
Because when you put that money directly into the people's hands, like, you know, my parents still live in Garberville. They run Organic Grace. You know, I have that firsthand experience of what it's like to, like, see a business go through the ups and downs of running in Garberville, in Humboldt County, you know, and I've seen how the businesses have been affected over the past few years, you know, and it just keeps coming back to me that, like, the biggest problem here is just that it's like it's going to that winner take all, you know. It's like drying up for these little guys, these small, like, just people who, like, I feel like are forgotten by a large part of the world.
Right, and it is an industry. Formerly, it used to be that you would get, you know, very well paid if you're helping with these ventures. At least very well paid if you're paid at all. And then now we've had more and more sort of migratory workers, I suppose, do the opposite of union style decisions, and you know, it's bordering on being one of the least represented worker coalitions around. Like, you know, and then we have many people roll into town who I'm sure would love to have the option to, you know, come up, sign in, have a little bit of a checkup on who they are, and then try to get fitted to some work somewhere with, you know, a local organization. But there is no such organization. It's just a Wild West with winner take all at the top of it. And, so, you know, some of these people are managing it for 20% of the income, and some of them are landowners for 50% of it. And then the other 30 gets divvied up between all the people who do the rest of the work. And then they're not even, you know, our rich around here are millionaire rich, and they keep feeling like they're lumped in with the millionaires and billionaires. But billionaires are 1,000 millionaires per piece, and that is just a single million to single billion. So they, you know, they still go through a lot of stress, and still, even when they want to represent lower taxes and keep the government out of my business, it's a rare place around here that has a house that would be estate taxed. Anyway, we should.
Well, and those people are affected too. You know, even the people who may have, like, larger income flow. Right. You know, like, they still felt it. You
at
know,
a certain point, they can just. Changed. At a certain point, they can just accept that not as much can be monopolized, but they can have a much better not in my backyard situation. If you have, you know, a U.B.I. in your backyard, oh boy, it's going to be a lot nicer. And, you know, we can have a sort of the next thing to, hey, we're going to give you a bus out of town, and actually they're all right. You know, that's a moderate solution in a world with a U.B.I. Because you could be like, all right, it's not working for you here, try somewhere else, but we're not necessarily, you know, we can probably expect better, you know, from you than if we spent $3,000, 3 times a UBI or more on just jailing you for 6 months to see if that teaches you a lesson in how to do crime.
Exactly.
All righty, Xack. It's been great to talk with you and have somebody to bounce around some modern concepps with. Sorry we didn't get to.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry we didn't get to more callers, but we had a great caller nevertheless. So I think
thanks again, Falcon. That was great.
Yeah, quality over quantity.
Appreciate that outside of the box thinking.
Yeah. So we can take it over to the All Sides now for a few minutes, and yeah. Once again, we'll catch you around the other side of the election season, maybe.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Yeah, you too, Xack.